All right, good morning.
Morning.
A little quick up front, session materials are available to download in the Apple Event app. So you all probably got a reminder on Sunday, I think, a reminder email manager registration. Go back to those sessions and then you have to click on the actual session. And there is a link for the session materials. Just in case. I know it's a question that came up before. You don't need to download anything for this session right now, but if you want to, we'll find it. All right, user story mapping. It's me. Few words about myself. I started as what they call a citizen developer, really far back when it was Claris with version 3.5, and I used it a lot for all the things that I was doing. I was by far, very far from being a professional, obviously. Took a lot of detours into nonprofit and all sorts of other stuff until I really found my way back into full-time FileMaker, did in-house development for some time, worked on a vertical solution that transitioned into a big corporate software situation where I worked for a few years. And now I'm back with Skeleton Key, where we do custom development like many of us do. So I've tasted many different areas of the FileMaker world, and every single one has a little bit. Right now, I'm the COO at Skeleton Key, still do development. I'm a big believer in Scrum and Agile in general, and user story mapping is definitely an important tool in that toolbox, but it's not bound to it by any means. It's really difficult to be here right now because I'm up from upstate New York, and mapling season is starting right now. I really want to get back and tap my trees. That's one of the things that gets me away from the computer and out into nature, and I really enjoy it. And these lovely people there, that's my family in my home country of Germany at the top of the Cathedral of Cologne. And if I look at a little window there, then look it up. It's a big cathedral. I just carried my daughter up 550 steps to that tower. It was a good workout, but it was a good time. Anyway, yes, and more recently I began understanding American football after 12, 13 years in this country. So I'm looking forward to the Super Bowl. Anyway, let's talk about user story mapping. Real quick show of hands, who's familiar with user story mapping? Any way, shape. All right, great. Some not. So I really hope that there's something in here for everybody. I'm going to look at three things. It all starts with shared understanding and why that's important. So that's what I'm going to start out with. And then really dive into what is user story mapping with demos, going to walk you through building a map, and then really looking at what does that provide us as developers in terms of value for our project, how can we use it, and what distinguishes that method from others. So upfront, user story mapping is a method. The demo will use a particular software, but it's not bound to that at all. It's just a method to build out these user story maps, and I'll show you different examples. And along the way, I'll share some resources, very simple, but hopefully it's going to help you to keep going. All right, let's dive in. Software developer talks to a client, like, yeah, listen to everything you said. I wrote it down. I know exactly what you need. I'm going to call you when it's done. Right? That's exactly how it goes. Let's take that to a different situation. Customer calls a bakery and says, hey, I would like to have a cake. Sure, what do you want it to say? So long, Alicia in purple. Got it? Anything else? Yeah, put some stars around it. This is how it came out. I wrote it down, handed it off to somebody else. It says, so long, Alicia. It says stars around it. It says in purple, exactly everything that was written down, right? So, by the way, cakerex.com is a really cool website. Really entertaining. But it's all about that communication. This is what I'm talking about when I say shared understanding. And this cartoon, you might have seen it before, is really describing it very nicely. The first top left picture is like, hey, I'm on the same page. Yeah, I agree. But really, everybody has a different picture in their mind. They don't even know it. And that's the danger. That's the real danger. As soon as you find yourself asking the question, are we on the same page? Stop. stop. It's the wrong question, right? And then they draw it out on a chalkboard and say, oh, hang on a minute. We all have something else in mind right now. So let's figure out how we can bring that together, and in the end, they actually walk away with shared understanding. And that is a simple little sketch here, but it's a process that we all deal with in the beginning of the project, right? And that's the most important piece. Shared understanding is really the foundation for a project, because if you don't have shared understanding from the get-go, then you're starting out on the wrong foot, right? Like you're not even working on the same thing. So user story mapping is a tool that helps us build that shared understanding. And I'm going to dive right into a demo. Switch over to that. All right, before I dive in here, let me set the stage. So we're working with a company, with a client that sells used vehicles of some sort. And the company specializes in auctioning them off. They're all over the country. The vehicles are in different locations. They auction them off online, and they handle that whole process of putting it online and then handling the sale of the vehicle. So we have in the top here, we start out on the top left, the owner submits the vehicle information, staff reviews the information. I'm going through the blue ones now. And then the listing is published for auction, and then the auction ends. Each of those bigger topics has subtopics. And the topic that's really important is what we're going to build out now. The auction ends. That's really where the client experiences the pain. So they have an existing solution, but it's not really working for them. They have a couple of pain points. I want to find out what they can do about it. Right? Okay, so I'm going to start this out. It's going to get quick and circle back. We need to. All right, so when the bidding ends, we select the bid. So the bid selection process starts out. So we look at the highest bidder. Right, that's obvious, but sometimes they have a bad bidding history, so we're going to catch that, right? Like they bid on something that don't pay. Let's make sure we capture that, and then we don't award the bid. Then we let them know that they won the bid, because then they have to start the money transfer. And we send an initial set of paperwork that needs to be signed by the client, so we can get the process going. And that's really where it gets cumbersome, because we send it on email. And the buyer has like 48 hours to respond to it. That's kind of tricky. And then they need to turn that around. So the emailing process, we produce the PDFs, I need to send it out. And then the buyer has to pay, and we need to complete the sale. And once that money transfer and all this is done, we keep moving. But sometimes they don't pay, so we've got to consider that as well. So we've got to ensure the payment was made, accounting is on that, that's usually pretty good. But we need to check whether the paperwork was sent back, right? They email it back to us. So we have somebody checking every morning whether or not the email came, and if they do, they save it on a file share, and then we check that file share. Do we have the documents there? So that's the process that we do right now. So every morning somebody comes in and checks the file share, checks the emails, makes sure nothing falls through the cracks. That's just a little cumbersome. So that's definitely a problem area that we want to address here. Buyer doesn't pay, that has a certain element to it, but usually they pay at some point, and then we need to send the final document over, and then that via email as well. So here we go. Let's look at that. We've sent the final sales document. So they sign and scan the final paperwork, and that's really a problem, because they need to print it out, sign it, and scan it back in, right? So that is a problem, and sometimes they don't pay because they don't have a printer or they don't have a scanner. So that's really problematic. Things that get hung up, this is really a bottleneck that we are dealing with, and we address that somehow. So we need to have a better way to automate that whole email process. I don't know. Workflow here, right? And because when they send it back, we do the same thing. We save the attachment to the file share, and our admin staff goes in and checks it. And once it's all there, then we keep going with the sale. And once the sale is through, we can actually release the vehicle, which means call the location where the vehicle is located, and we send the paperwork over there that they can release it and buyer can come pick it up. So there's all sorts of stuff that's going on. Before they do that, the buyer needs to sign a waiver, including a typo. So that whole process, that's really what's holding us up a lot, because this whole email and scanning is problematic. So I want to highlight these as red, because these are real pain points. Like, that's what we want to talk about. And the client is thinking that we need a way to automatically pass out the emails, right? Because we don't, and then we have this problem that many buyers don't have a printer anymore. They don't have a scanner. So things get delayed because of that. Because sometimes when we think they're not paying, we call them up and they say, like, no, we just don't have a printer and we don't have a scanner. So this is what's holding things up right now. So then we gotta let everybody know what's going on. The storage lot is waiting for the sale, so we gotta let them know that things are on the way. So it's just cumbersome, that whole part of our process. So so what we really want is we want to be able to automatically pass out those emails and the attachments that they get saved, that we somewhere in there, this is what we're looking for. All the other stuff somehow works. At some point, we want to have a more dynamic website for submitting the information for the vehicle to begin with. That's really important. It needs to be mobile friendly at this point. But doing a crash. All right. Don't want to submit a ticket. No, thank you. Other than that, there's software, by the way. So, we want to make the intake website a bit more mobile friendly and more dynamic. And really, those are things that we want to do in the future. But really, the important things are the items in red over there. Oh yeah, data validation is important, because people type in things that we need to then verify afterwards, but we should be able to verify a VIN number and that kind of stuff, right? So, so those are requests that we want to deal with at some point. All right, but again, before I'll say it again, the big deal is the request to build something. So let me pull this up here real quick. This is the full story map. So this took us just now about 5 minutes to go through. This was 2.5 speed. But there's a lot of information. And I think this is really where user story maps shine. You can convey a ton of information very quickly, and you can map it out. It's a collaborative process as much as possible. If you have the people in the room, do it with Post-its. You can invite people to a website like this where you can really create it together. And at least you can share this out on the screen so everybody sees it. Remember that cartoon in the beginning where you draw it out on the chalkboard? You're visualizing what you are thinking. And that is so valuable that they're going to say, oh, no, not this. This is really not what we're doing. Or you're making a note there. It's like, no, that's not important. They're making an offhand note about this new website, which is not our conversation at all. You just throw it in there. You capture that information. And you have all these reminders. Every single card here is a reminder about a certain conversation you had in this process. Maybe you're even recording these conversations, so you can go back, but it's reminders about lots of other things that were going on. And when you pull up a story map like a month, 2 months, 3 months after the conversation, you'd be amazed how much your memory just picks back up. Like, oh yeah, I remember this and here and over here. Okay, we talked about this. We were going to do this. It's a really, really effective way to capture information, document it, and have it available for the next part of the process. So let's take this apart a little bit. There are generally 3 categories here. We start up top with what they call the activities. These are just big activities that are grouped together. Usually they're tasks done where people achieve a certain goal. So an auction ends, there's certain things that I need to do once the auction ends. When the bid is submitted, there's certain things that we need to do. So this level, don't take it as like this is checking my email might be up there, but it also might be setting up my email account. It varies on your project at what level those activities should be defined at. But they should be similar across the whole story map. You shouldn't jump from like, I'm checking my email and then I install this new software package. Those are very different activities, right? So then they should be on a similar activity level. And this is really where you start out for a high-level overview when you start the conversation. Like, hey, let me understand the rough process like we did earlier. It's like, yeah, they submit information, we list it on the website, we have the bidding process, and then we have the sales process. It gives you a rough outline of the story. And you can dive into the smaller steps and understand. And that's the next level. That's referred to as the backbone, the yellow cards there. That's really the narrative flow. Like, again, this is all about stories. So oftentimes you would say, and then I do this, and then we select the bid, and then the buyer pays and sales get completed. It's all activities. And you notice that all user activities. There's very little where like, and then we write this information to the database. Like that's what we do after the fact, right? But it's understanding the workflow and what needs to happen, what goal needs to be achieved, that you put in this backbone, in this narrative flow. It's all about these stories. And as you build out story maps, you go wide first. Don't worry about the detail. If they mention something important, then you put that in as it comes, but go wide first and then dive into detail. This allows us to determine where do we actually need the detail and don't spend time on something that is less relevant. Right? It's a very dynamic process. Things that might start out down here might move up later. Don't try to get it right. There is no right. Capture the information, move things around as the conversation evolves. Because chances are your client doesn't even know the exact outline yet because they've been doing it for many decades, but they've never documented it. So it just comes out like a associative thinking maybe, and you're organizing this process and those thoughts for the first time potentially. And then you put in the details as needed, those white cards. They're like really task level stuff where you can define more detail as you need it. And they're less strict in terms of like sequential alternative, like maybe sometimes the buyer pays, sometimes the buyer doesn't pay. That can both happen. Don't worry about it. Like you can represent all this because you'll remember the conversation. So this is what it looks in the bigger picture. Again, we have the activities up there. We have that narrative flow. Remember, it's a story that they're telling and you're building it out. And then we add the details underneath and sometimes those columns underneath. So, and the important thing really is those cards are reminders. You saw it in the demo really. In this particular software, you can open it up, you can add screenshots and you can type. But whatever you use, you can also put links in and say like, hey, we discussed this in the recording at 20 minutes. That's maybe all you need to put in there. But it's like that anchor point for this piece of the conversation. So there's a lot more detail, but it's not, the assumption is not that you capture all the requirements in this particular piece of it. That's not it. It's about getting that big picture and being able to be reminded to have that process document. So you saw me do that. I framed the conversation. So it's important with the plan. What are we talking about? Are we talking about an existing system? Are we talking about a completely new system? And what part of it are we talking about? Right. So frame the conversation, rough outline. Says really important legacy existing systems, so that we're not talking about something that they don't actually want to address. Like find out what needs to be addressed. Big picture first, mile wide, inch deep. Talked about that. Go up top level activities and backbone first, then the details last. There's really this three-step process that helps shape and guide the conversation too. Like once you have something visual in front of you, it's much easier to stay on that narrative, in that narrative flow, and not like jump and forget something and come back and say, oh yeah, we revisit that later, and you never revisit, so you're completely missing that part of the conversation. But that is only part one. Part two is where it's really interesting, because what we just did is we mapped the now status. That's okay. But now you start transforming this now into a later. Like, what's the future look like? And that's where really, I think the power comes in, where the interesting conversation starts. Yeah, I think we're going to have another demo here. Pull this up. So you map, you understand what's happening now, and then you start the conversation with the client. Like, all right, that's great. So what does the future state look like? What are we going for? All right, remember, so now we have this story map. And now it's about, they send in the request that they want to automatically pass up their emails. In this conversation, like I'm doing a certain demo where I, as the consultant, come in a little bit and help them understand, but sometimes it's the client who comes in with like, this is how I want it to work. So this is just one way of doing it. So they had this problem, but I want to actually, now that I understand where the problem is, let me understand this a little better, and I want to have a little bit more detail because we lumped together a few processes. So I need to pass that out a bit more. So we really start with sending the initial paperwork, right? So that's the first thing. And then once that goes through, then we have the sales paperwork. So those items go over there, and those are all sort of pain points and problematic. So you wanted to have an automatic passing of the information that comes in as email, but we want to send the initial paperwork. But what about we do it differently? How about we don't email anymore, but the user just goes in and clicks one button that's like send initial paperwork. And then we introduce something new. Might have thought of it already. Let's do an e-sign process here. Yeah. So, but I'll build it out in your process, and I'll translate it from your current email process to e-signing and see if that's valuable. So we can click that button, send out the paperwork, and then when the buyer signs it, you get a dashboard notification. So nobody has to go in the morning, check the file, check your email. You'll just get that little number up on the dashboard. You click on it, and you can. Nobody has to remember a thing. So when that person knows the file leaves, you get that number. Okay. So let me make that distinction here. The gray ones are the things that happen automatically behind the scenes. Zero user interaction needed. The green ones are the things that the user actually needs to do or can see there's user interaction involved. So just want to color code that a little bit so that you can see that. So we can do the same thing with the final paperwork, right? So we get that initial paperwork done. So we do the same exact thing with the final paperwork. Once we have everything reviewed, we can click that button again. And let me just add some detail here so you understand what actually happens in the background. So Pharmac will produce the PDF. We send it off to the e-sign provider, so we get you an account there. That all happens automatically. And then the buyer gets an email with the link. So all they have to do is click that link and sign that document. Then you get that notification. But again, I'm going to turn all these gray because none of this is anything that you have to do, right? So, and then at some point, we should probably look into when a document does not get signed after certain days, right? So we need to talk about that threshold. I'm just going to put that down here so we don't forget about it. And then pretty much the same thing happens with the final paperwork, right? So we're just going to copy and paste some cards because it's really the same thing. But I'm just going to lay it out so that on the same page. So once the buyer then signs the final documents, very similar process there, right? Like you don't have to go check your file anymore. You don't have to go check your email. You just simply get that notification on the dashboard, which you can then click and process what the next steps need to be. So that whole waiting and like repetitive checking is just completely gone. And out of this big process where we still have the old one, let me just clean those up because none of this needs to happen anymore. So we're really looking at the future now. So all this stuff is taken care of. and with a few very specific user interactions. And so let's look at this, the buyer doesn't pay. That was mostly driven by them not being able to sign the paperwork. So that's probably going to go away. So let's get that out of the mix. Your initial request was the email. We don't need that anymore. That's addressed here through the e-sign. Still leave the buyer doesn't pay there because something probably needs to happen. Not sure yet. So let's just keep that hanging out there so we don't forget about it. But really, that is the new process that we could build for you. All right, the next one already. So pull up this map here for a moment. So now this was a very quick granted where you have that conversation in front of the client or with the clients, like, how can we make it better? And you start mapping it out. And this is loosely based on a real example. Like, this is very much how the conversation went. We're like, yeah, this is really painful. We need to address it. We need to better add this. But the client then is able to begin to understand the process. Because we mapped out the previous process, they're getting familiar with the process of user story mapping. And as we lay it out, they see it. And maybe they even have ideas like, oh, no, we can't do that. We can't do the dashboard notification here. We need to do it there because that's where these people look. Like whatever comes up in that conversation, you can capture here and bring it right in. So let me jump back to this guy. That's kind of how you build out that aftermap. So I want to point out a few specific items in the process of user story mapping where I do believe it provides really unique value beyond almost any other method that I'm familiar with. And it highlights gaps. If you write down things as text, you don't see gaps. In this process, it becomes really obvious. Like, we just simply don't know what's going to happen in that empty column. And often, this is a different map, so don't be confused about that screenshot before I made the demo. It could be like, yeah, I don't know what happens when the buyer doesn't pay. We need to talk with finance about that. We really don't have the information. It could indicate that you don't even have the right people in the room, but you can leave it there. It's a reminder. It's really obvious, and you can decide to address it or not. So that's one of those things that user story maps bring to the table and helps you complete a story before you deliver a product. And you never knew there was a gap potentially, right? But then the client goes, but what about this? And you might have caught it in a user story. You can highlight pain points. This is actually a map that we made for a client, a different one, really, really wide. They had a lot going on. They had a very small budget. But then we could say, like, out of all this stuff, there's probably a lot of work in there. Like, what is the most painful for you right now? Like, if we can only do X numbers of hours of work, which one would it be? And if they're looking at this entire map, it really helps put everything in context because immediately they're comparing one thing to another. They're not just like, oh yeah, we just talked about this, so let's do this. They might make a bad decision. You might guide them to make a bad decision. With the user story map, you see everything and you can even say like, oh, those red ones, those are the pain points. Those are the important things. What about the one like all the way over here on the left? You were talking about this earlier, that was important. So no, not compared to those. You can come to better decisions with the client, helping them through a ginormous amount of information to really come to, let's focus here first. And this is where the next step comes in. These user story maps then help you build out a development strategy. Like, it's not like, hey, we have this giant thing, let's build it all right. This is really not the point. But then, there you go. You slice out a release. So out of all this, you identify like, let's work on this and let's work on that. Those are the most important things. And then you can even dive deeper. Potentially there's more information there. You can even decide to build a more detailed story map for just those two processes. But you came to a decision and you can come back to that decision if there's any conversation afterwards, like, hey, what about this one? It's like, remember this map? Like, this is how we came to this decision. and how we do that. So I want to actually have another demo on how to slice out a release based on that little example project that we have. Let me switch that over. All right, so now we have come to a decision with the client, like that's the e-sign thing, but they're really suffering. They're super busy. They need something as soon as possible. So let's look at really what we need. So in this particular one, slicing out a release is building that horizontal slice. And this is something, I'll pause this for a second, that I'm going to point out again. We're introducing another dimension that you don't have in any other tool. When you're building a backlog of work, like it's a two-dimensional backlog. It's not just a list that goes top down. It's not just a document that has certain bullets. We're introducing a second dimension that could really be very, very powerful. Because now I can hide all the ones below and say, like, which ones do we actually want to address first? And I can drag them into the right release horizontal slice. And say, like, yeah, those are really the ones that we need to do first in the MVP. Actually, the e-sign request, we could add that to the web portal that we also have. But that's not that important. If the buyer actually gets an email and they can click the link, then that's all we need. We don't need that web portal first. So let's leave that gray card down there. Like, that's not that important. So let's get that email out first. And we also might not need to save the PDFs to the file share anymore. So don't know if we need that. So let's bench that for now. We revisit later. It's what we do now. But if this all works with the e-sign, we might not need it at all anymore. But we definitely want to do the e-sign all the way through. Again, we don't want to add it to the web portal quite yet, because if the email works, that would be just absolutely amazing. So let's look at what we could want to do next. That's definitely adding the e-sign request to the web portal. So when they log into their buyer's portal, then they'll see that they have outstanding requests. Let's do that there. And then the next version, right now, I think the additional reminders when something doesn't happen, that's really going to be important. But that's not something we need right now. We can still follow our current processes to make sure and check that they're signed after like 2 days or something. But I would like to automate that later. So let's put that in there. And you notice that I even create new cards in this process, because now the conversation shifts and the client is like, oh yeah, and like if we do this here, we also want to do that there. So it's always a living document that keeps evolving. Same PDF versions, don't know if we still need them. So let's just leave them there. But we definitely want to add the waivers to the e-sign integration as well. And that's all the detail I need right now. Like, that's going to be in the future. That's a few weeks from now. So, but this top slice here, this is really the most important thing. Those items up there, they're not that important. So this is the strategy that we want. And once all that is done, the e-sign, then that's when I want to look at the more dynamic website. So let's put that in line behind here. And there I just put little reminder cards again and say, like, that's in the future. So we have release 1, 2, and 3. They need to go out. They cover the e-sign stuff. And then at some point we start looking at the dynamic website. So all of a sudden, we took this giant amount of information and sliced out various levels of detail to understand what is valuable to the client, right? They might come in firmly in that conversation and say, like, we definitely need to save everything still to our file share, right? There's always something that the client hangs on to. These conversations allow you to say, great, let's do this other stuff first. It's going to help you, then revisit later. We can really slice it out. It's not even a new project or something. It's like, let's get this out to you first, and then they might become next again. No, we don't need this anymore. The new solution is. So there's a whole lot of detail. So once you slice out this sort of release strategy, there's another element in it where the two dimensions that I refer to allow you to really slice even a particular feature with more granularity. Because it's not, let's do all of the e-sign stuff and then all of the website stuff. It's not what it's about. Let's pick the most important things from the e-sign stuff and focus on those first. And I think that is something that in some projects happens where you're going to talk about features. Do you want this feature or that feature or that feature? And they're going to like this feature. But maybe they only need 50% of that feature, really. And this is the tool that allows you to have that conversation and to even delineate that in a way that we often are not able to. Other methods. Then when it's time to build it out, these task level stories, the white ones, they make really good development items. So whatever you use, Jira, whatever project management tool you use, they make great stories that then a developer can work on. And the story map provides context. So depending on how you work, I work in a team where the developer maybe is not part of the initial conversation. But I still want to help the developer have context. I don't want to spend hours on re-explaining everything. I don't want them to watch the full recording of the meeting potentially. I can pull up that story map. It's like, here, this is what we're trying to do. Takes me 5 minutes maybe. They get the full picture. It's like, and this is where you come in. You need to build out that e-sign integration. So the first thing we need is we could provide build that API integration. This is what it comes down to. They get that full context. They know what we're trying to achieve, and it'll inform decisions that they make all the time anyway, right? Like along the development path. So having that context helps getting the actual development done. So it's very easy to share with team members. And I said it before, I'll say it again, story maps hold an amazing amount of information because they remind you of so much detail in the conversation. In an extremely visual way. You don't have to go digging for it. You pull up that map, and maybe you even build copies like the iteration that I showed you where take it from the before to the after map. I just made a copy of the before map and then started messing about with it so I can go back to the original one. It's super easy. Like, this is how it looked before. This is how it looked now. These are the conversations we have. So, and again, it's a very powerful reminder for the company. I was using this tool, Stories on Board, really like it. It's not the only one out there. There are many out there. And in fact, these are some of the first story maps that I built. You don't need a tool at all. Post-its work extremely well. You can move them around. You can turn them sideways to indicate they're more important than the others. So all you need is really a deck of Post-its. This is a story map Christina and I built, I don't know, 6-7 years ago or something. It did a really good job laying out the project that it worked. So, in summary, the build shared understanding. Really, I wanted, if nothing else, take away from this. When you say, like, are we on the same page, or like, are we talking about the same thing? That's not something that you can confirm with a yes. There needs to be more. Because you don't know. Nobody knows. There's no way to know. Build shared understanding is going to set everybody up for a more successful project. And it's going to help conversations down the road. Potentially there's disagreement about the scope. It allows you to go back and circle back. It's like, hey, we have this map that documented what we talked about. And it's all much more unlikely that there are scope difference disagreements of any kind. I really like that the user story map focuses on the user and the story and the workflow. Like, it helps us to stay out of the technical thinking for the moment, and we have a common language with the client or the users to say, this is what we're currently working on, this is what got done, now you can do this, now you can do that, now you can do that. we're very good at translating that into technical implementation, but having that conversation on the user level is quite powerful. Get this again, mindful conversations, and it really helps us see the full picture and the most valuable work. And also, it's a really great selling tool, because you can pull this back up and go like, yeah, we did this part of it, but remember when we talked, these things over here, you also mentioned they're not very good. So you want to get this in the backlog, shall we get going on there? And this two-dimensional view that I was mentioning is something that I don't know any other tool that you would get that with, where you can slice out this release horizontally, really say like, for this feature, I want to only have this element and this element and this element, and you can focus on what's most valuable to the user in the moment. So you're actually able to determine what is the MVP. With other tools, it's really difficult to determine that. Resources. This is a link to Jeff Patton's website. So all of this method is something that Jeff Patton developed or came up with, and is really powerful. There's a very simple summary PDF, and I think that's the QR code there. That's the reminder. I'll pull it up in a second. But the website is really good. This sort of cheat sheet is extremely helpful, and that's really all you need to get started. Some posters. If you want to sign up for a tool like Stories on Board, there's cardboarded.com. There are other ones. You obviously can. They're very helpful. They're very useful. The book, User Story Mapping by Jeff Patton, is a really interesting read. It's very fun to read. It's a really good audiobook, too. The guy's pretty funny. You can also Google it. He's got a couple of things on YouTube. But that's really all you need to get going, because this is not a tool that you need a certain subscription for anything. It's a way to think about things and to start working on your user story mapping. These are the tools that should get you started. Was it here? So thank you very much. By the way.
So, I mean, you showed a pretty linear process, but what if when the process diverges? So what if there was, say, like a bigger process for when you don't close on the sale, or how do you visually show that in the story map?
Yeah. Let me pull this up. You just put next to each other. So you can just say, like, we sent the initial paperwork unless we have certain information. We have it on file. And then you can have alternative project processes that are optional just right next to each other. Again, I would say don't overthink it. Try to represent it in your map, whether it's in a separate sort of backbone card here, bigger, or you can even do that here. Alternatively, do this. So it's really about keeping it simple. There's no necessarily right or wrong way there.
When are you engaging with this in your process? Is it pre-sales, post-sales? Like when do you go
Discovery?
Do it in discovery?
Discovery, yeah. So we sell our discovery projects, and this is where we would do that in the discovery, because then we can present the results from discovery and say like, hey, this is the most important thing. So depending on what it is, maybe they need a full solution. We have a ginormous story map, but again, we're talking about the same thing. Maybe they just need little fixes like this example. But it would always be doing the discovery process, which in our example.
How long have you personally been doing this technique? Like how long does it take for someone to actually like get good and do this?
It doesn't take much. Like Christine is shaking her head. It really is not rocket science at all. I think you just stop overthinking it and start doing it. Like maybe with a small project, internal project, maybe even just the Jeff Patton, the book starts out with like story map your morning routine. You know? Like do simple exercises. We did a few, we do tech lunches Fridays, you know, share knowledge kind of deal. We did a few tech lunches and people started getting pretty interested in it. To the point we had one client who didn't end up buying software, but he bought another consulting session because the story mapping was so valuable to them. It's like, wow, this is an interesting turn of events. Not exactly what we do, but sure. Like that, as I said, like all of a sudden, for the first time ever, they have their process laid out in front of them. But
Do you do other things in discovery or just this?
no, this is one of the elements that we do. Like, I mean, a lot of it, but it's one of the central tools too. And then you need to break it down, obviously, that, information also. But it really helps focus conversation and understand. This is not the document we send to the client. Like we break it down, then, in our case, Agile using Jira, like some of these yellow cards turn into epics, these turn into issues, and then we go through and like estimate the smaller scale. But it also allows us to understand what's involved here, because maybe there's something super intricate in the initial paperwork that we didn't catch, where they then go like, oh yeah, and like for the initial paperwork, we need to know the age of the car and this and this and this and this and this, which is really difficult to get. Like that helps in the process, and it's more likely to come out when they see like, this is what I'm mapping out, and it's like, oh yeah, but you're missing something.
Yeah.
How much effort do you need to put in to keep this map in sync with your Jira?
It depends on, I keep them in sync until at some point, sometimes I abandon them. Like as long as they're valuable to me. That's always my approach. If they become effort to maintain and less value, then I say like, you served your purpose, that's great. See, yeah, we're moving on a different path, right? But more like I've had a few where I did abandon it and then, oh man, I wish I had kept it up to date. In this software product actually syncs with, so it makes it fine. So as you add stuff in Jira, it could, but that's a more technical aspect of it. That's not the core of your
Two questions. Does this program have version control where you can go back to a version of before?
This particular one, not. No, I did it here where I said this briefly. I just copy this map where I have my first version and a bit more, and then this is my before map. There's 2 clicks to say like, from here I'm going to tear it apart and build the new view, but I want to preserve this old one. So I can just go in here and say like, oh yeah, copy this one, and then I can go in it.
And in terms of preserving, is there, so let's say the project is completely done and want to retain this map.
Yeah.
Future, can you, does it allow you to like download some visual PDF of it?
Yeah, we just leave it on there, quite frankly, like with different folders. You can download it in XML representation, be uploaded. But again, those are the more technical aspects of this particular product. For the posted story maps, we just took pictures, and I was able to find them many years later and go like, oh yeah. So maybe even that, and this could go along with pictures. Maybe they pull up a screen and you have screenshots, or maybe they draw something on a whiteboard. You take a picture with your phone, and like there's much more around it as well. So that depends. Yeah.
You said this is useful with legacy systems, or could you use this midway through a project? Like,
Yeah, I mean, this
let's
is,
map this out.
yeah. Maybe that's personal preference, but like, I mean, I use this demo where like they have a system, right? And they say like, but this part of it is really painful. For me, it always helps to like, all right, let's talk real quick, not much detail about like everything you do in the system to understand the context. So this is what we did here. Like, let's walk it through. Takes maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes to get that picture together. And then I can say like, now please, let's hone in and focus on this problem piece over here and how we can solve this, right? And in this particular product, you could even say like, I want to get everything out of the way, collapse all others, just make it disappear so we can actually focus on something. All right. Thank you very much. I'll be around here if you want to talk story map finding. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.